was thinking more about the question of why that whole thing of clinginess is such a sore point for me. And the thing I realized is that it's because it's one of the few areas in society where we still consider the situation to be utterly, like our own worth to be defined utterly by what someone else is thinking. And you might say, well, but sure, no, we say over and over in our society that no one gets to decide anyone else's worth, that everyone's worth is inherent, and don't you believe in that? And I do. But specifically when it comes to romantic feelings, so for some reason our society changes the playing field and moves the goalposts and says, well, whether or not you are an overly clingy or overly distant person is not up to you. It's always up to how your partner interprets your behavior. If your partner says that you are too clingy, that makes everything you say to them, all of your expressions of affection, less appropriate, inherently less worthy. If they say that you are too distant, then any personal space you take, any distance you take is always inappropriate. And so it's utterly subjective, of course. It has to be defined that way by what your partner is thinking or by how other people judge it, because there is no objective standard on how much a couple should ideally be interacting. So it always becomes this question of opinion, so it's very difficult, I think, to have a sense of stability and confidence about how much time you should or should not be spending with a romantic partner or a potential romantic partner. And so I thought within myself, well, what if, at least for my own sake, for the sake of my own sanity, I worked out my own objective standard, well, insofar as I can be objective. And I think part of the problem, part of the reason I find not being accused of being clingy, but the possibility of being accused of being clingy so distressing is precisely because when I'm dealing with a partner who, when they're not interacting with me, I can't tell whether or not it's okay for me to message them. Like, I can't know, if I message them, whether they're going to be thinking, oh, why is she messaging me? I didn't message her first. Why is she doing this? Like, this is stupid. Like, I didn't want her to message me. Like, I can't know if they're going to be thinking that, or if they're going to be thinking, oh, she messaged me. How lovely. I'm glad to hear from her. Like, I can't know what they're thinking. And I won't find out until I've actually committed the act. That's the thing. It's like being in a country where you never find out what is legal or illegal until you've already committed the crime. And it's naturally going to be very stressful and terrifying and tiring, and it's necessarily going to involve a great deal of overthinking on my part. So, like I said, I have to work out some way of it, not being this place of anxiety anymore. Because if I think about my main source of anxiety within the dating world, it is that question of how often is okay to message this person. And if I think about why one of the predominant reasons I'm so comfortable with the American guy, it is, as I said, he messages me so often and sometimes so inappropriately that frankly I feel very relaxed with him, precisely because it means I can message him all I want and however I want, and be reasonably sure that I will probably still hear from him again anyway. And that's very soothing. And so it occurs to me then, what if it works in reverse as well? What if by messaging people like a nutter, I'll be freeing them to message me however they feel like messaging me? And I'm trying to think back over some instance in my life where I have actually driven people away by messaging them in a crazy way. And actually, no. The people who I drove away through my messaging were usually people was already excessively worried about. If I had just not worried about it and just messaged them organically, like according to my personality and what what I want to be and what I want to do, it wouldn't have been that much of a problem. It only became a problem because once once the person would take too long to reply, I would start thinking, oh, they're thinking I'm being clingy and inappropriate. Oh no, I've messaged too much. Even if I've only sent one or two messages. And, typically they would get back to me later though anyway, but by the time they would, the emotional damage had already been done of me sitting there thinking, oh, they're thinking I'm annoying and boring and stupid and, that they want me to never speak to them again. Which, looking back, I was actually left with very good evidence for thinking that they did actually want me around and wanted to talk to me. It's just that I kept, assuming based on very scant evidence. Um, yeah. So how can I develop a protocol for myself on messaging where I'm still taking the other person's comforts into account, the other person's time into account, whilst still allowing myself the freedom to be myself? And I suppose one of the things I could do in theory is when I'm getting to know a person for the first time. I mean, if I'm going to settle down with the American guy, this is probably not going to be an issue anymore. But supposing things don't work out for one reason or another, what is my plan? And my plan is, I suppose that very early on I can say to them, how often do you think is a reasonable amount for people to message each other? And, I can maybe even directly ask them, so how many times a day do you think is appropriate or inappropriate? And, as I say that, I realize that actually the thing that makes me sensitive about it is precisely because I consciously know if they like me, they will want me to message them more often. If they don't like me, they will want me to message them less. And the thought I'm having is that if I establish with them in the first place that, I don't know, messaging 5 times a day is normal if you're interested in someone, and then later on so I start messaging them 5 times a day, and then later on they're like, can you message me less? I will know that I'm obligated to take that as them indirectly saying, I don't want to date you. And that moment is going to be very painful because they're not paying me the respect of saying, oh, yeah, sorry, Shona, I'm not interested in you that way, or not anymore. And I'm having to learn it in not in the moment of them facing me and respecting me, but in a moment of them finding me stupid and annoying. Um, that's the hard thing. That's the really hard thing. And, so maybe a value I can decide within myself is, okay, if a guy is not directly communicating with me where I stand with him, if he's not directly telling me whether or not he likes me, it's not my fault then if he perceives me as messaging him too much. It can only become my fault if he has if he has failed to communicate his expectation. Well, no, it becomes my fault if he has communicated his expectations and I've violated them. But if he hasn't communicated his expectations to me, then it's fair game. It has to be accepted that I may very well communicate in a way that he doesn't like. And then the responsibility would be largely upon him to tell me that. And, yeah, if he can't tell me that much, then the situation isn't really my fault then, is it? Um, and I'm feeling like that's a very good standard, but it fails to acknowledge how difficult it can sometimes be to tell people exactly where they stand with you, or how hard it can sometimes be to work that out. But then if I think about it, even if I was seeing, like, if I liked a guy at all, like, if I think about my own feelings, if I like a guy at all, and I'm at the phase where I'm trying to get to know him, I am going to want him to message me fairly often so that I can get to know him. And so that he can get to know me as well. And yeah, so if he's not, yeah, and so actually, yeah, I know within myself that if a guy is not messaging me much, it bothers me and I hate it. Because then I don't know what he wants. I don't know what he's expecting from me. What I'm hearing myself say, though, then, is that my sense of self-worth is still very much wrapped up in what the other person wants, what the other person expects, whether or not I'm meeting those expectations. When, in truth, at the very most, how I handle those questions will be a statement on whether or not I fit with that particular person at that particular point in our lives. It won't actually be a statement about my worth. Those two things are utterly separate. And, you know, so really in those moments where a guy is telling me that or in, appearing to tell me that I'm messaging him too often, I should not take that as a sign that my feelings of love are somehow inherently invalid or inappropriate. What I should do instead is remember that in my own value set, the feelings and actions of love are inherently valuable. I inherently value those things and esteem them. I heavily esteem human connection. And not only that, but I don't carry the expectation that every guy I communicate with and message on a regular basis is necessarily going to have a romantic involvement with me. I have many male friends with whom I regularly exchange messages, and I enjoy the process. And, you know, I don't necessarily want to date any of them. There's maybe a few where I would willingly discuss the possibility, but of the friends I have, I can, as I said, the only one of them that seems like a real option to me is the American guy. And even then, I shouldn't be downcast about it. I just don't know what's going on there. I don't really, and it, yeah, anyway, I digress. The point is that, yeah, I need to establish, yeah, okay, so the standard I'm establishing here is, I suppose, to ask the person how often they think is an appropriate amount of messaging. You know, okay, I'm remembering that one of the problems I got into with the last guy, the European guy, one of the problems that occurred was when he said that, well, when he spoke as though he was going to message me once he was done eating dinner with his family, but then he never actually messaged me back. And, like, I was lying in my bed waiting for him for like well, not just lying in my bed waiting for him, I was watching anime for like 5 hours, binge watching, and, you know, I'm like, really? It takes a guy 5 hours to eat his dinner? Like, come on. I'm pretty sure that's not how long a dinner takes. And so, eventually, I just, like, I was finding the situation so stressful by that point. Looking back, I'm finding it preposterous that I was this stressed, but I got to the point where I was talking to one of my male friends, and I just broke down in tears because I was finding talking to him so comfortable, precisely because I wasn't attracted to him. And meanwhile, I was finding talking to the European guy just so stressful because I was really hung up on him. And yeah, the fact that he, you know, probably had finished his dinner and then thought, you know, rather than messaging Shona, I would prefer to do just about anything else in the world. You know, it felt I was reading the situation that way on some level. And, you know, even within myself right now, I'm still thinking, should I have read that moment and understood it to mean that he was done with me? Or, you know, was the responsibility still upon him to tell me that he had lost interest in me? And, you know, I think I did eventually screw up my courage to confront him on the matter, but it was much after the fact, and like I said, by then the damage had been done, and I already felt immensely inadequate, when really I should have just, yeah, dismissed it and given him the benefit of the doubt, because if he really was just not wanting to see me as a potential partner anymore, the responsibility was on him to say so. It shouldn't have been upon me to do some sort of magic detective work. Like, yeah, and certainly the argument can be made, well, but Shona, not everyone is that direct. Not everyone is so direct with how they feel about things. Well, if they can't even know how they feel and communicate about it, how on earth can I be expected to? Like, you know what I mean? And yeah. And certainly people could say, well, but Shona, you know, you've dealt with guys who you weren't really that into, and they figured it out by themselves and stopped talking to you over time. And the thing that I would counter argue is, well, actually, I suspect there are guys who have done this even in cases where I wasn't actually disinterested in them. It's just that I performed an action or two that they interpreted this way, and ever since, getting a conversation out of them has been like pulling hen's teeth. And, you know, this is even though actually I wouldn't have minded dating them. I wouldn't have minded if they had asked me out. Or I wouldn't have at least minded hanging out with them a little bit. And, you know, yeah. I'm getting very tired. But anyway, I guess, yeah, my thought is that the standard I need to establish is, first of all, to ask the other person what their expectations are in terms of how often to communicate. And, you know, second of all, to not see it as being upon me to figure out whether or not the guy is into me. To see it instead as being upon the guy to tell me whether or not he's into me. To tell me whether or not my attention is wanted. And you know, I can't, you know, the idea of, well, if you're having to always message him first, there's your answer, isn't really enough of an answer in of itself, because everybody has different communication styles. So, and you know, there have been times when a guy was messaging me in a way that made me think he didn't like me at all, and then actually I ended up hanging out with him more and discovering, oh, that's not what was meant by that behavior, and I just didn't rightly understand the other person's behaviors and mindset. And, you know, yeah. And I am finding it concerning because the implication, well, I mean, it sounds like I'm thinking that the responsibility is always on the other person and never on me, which isn't really how I think. I think that, you know, perhaps when I see a guy starting to do things that to me look as though he is probably disinterested, I don't have to directly say, oh, hey, you know, that thing you're doing, like, does that mean you want me to go away? Like, what I could do is just, casually be like, you know, if a guy is not really into me, I really like just being told rather than having to figure it out by myself. I like to be told. And, you know, that way at least the standard is established. And look, this has backfired on me before because, well, it sort of happened with the guy from 2 years ago where I had really hammered into him that if he couldn't date me or didn't want to, that he, should, uh, you know what I mean? That I really wanted him to just directly say that it wasn't going to happen. And then he stood me up, and I took that to mean that he was not being true to his word. And he did establish with me that he was going to tell me the truth. So, the fact that he didn't kind of is not really my fault. Like it's really I gave him like almost Goldilocks conditions for performing that rejection on me. And so, it isn't my fault. And it wasn't. And, if you're in a similar situation in your life, you shouldn't have to feel like it's your fault either. Um, okay, I am so freaking tired. But yeah, my thought is that if you are having issues with people thinking that you're too clingy or thinking that you're too distant, maybe it can pay for you to just sit and talk with some friends or other people about, okay, what do how do you see things moving forward? Am I being annoying by messaging you the way that I have? And, just really asking at the risk of sounding a bit silly. And, you know, maybe even talking about that whole question of being afraid of being called, clingy, you know, whether or not that's a reasonable expectation in the first place. And just, yeah. I think that's enough talking for now. But yeah, I hope you guys who watch this are having a good day, having a good time. I pray that Jesus blesses you in your life. And yeah, have a good sleep the next time you sleep.